how are you, buddy? How's it going? It's been a bit
Oh,
since we've chatted.
I'm doing well. I hope you're doing the same, Arnold. Good to see
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Things are good. Things are good. So for quick introduction, for those that are on, thanks for joining. My name is Arnold de la Fuente, founder of MavenNext. We are a ServiceNow premier partner. We've been in the digital transformation space for many years. Been doing not only ServiceNow but process engineering, reengineering for folks. Really focused on digital transformation and with a high focus on IGA and security. So really excited about this conversation. See where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have everyone here. And my name is TJ Gryzik. I'm one of the founders here at Clear Skye, which is an identity governance administration app that's available on the ServiceNow store. I've been in the space for about 10 years and have known Arnold for longer than Clear Skye has been around and have gone through some of the same challenges that I hear from our customers every day as both a customer and a partner of the ecosystem. So excited to be here and have a conversation about identity with Arnold.
Yeah, no, good stuff. I always forget that, TJ, that we've known each other for a bit now, right? And prior to the company's inception, so good stuff. So from a IGA perspective, I think the topic of what we're going to really get into is IGA and holistically, right? And specifically around, how are we? What are we seeing out there from our clients, right? Our partners, being in a ServiceNow implementation partner and really working with our folks to really understand how they're transforming their environments from manual to digital. We're pretty privy to a lot of those challenges that we see out there, right? And when it comes to identity management and from a security perspective, that's always at the front of the conversations, right? We talk a lot about applications and access to applications and onboarding and offboarding and data and CMDBs and such, and a lot of times our clients don't really hone in on the aspect of governance around all that, right? Who has access to what? Not only from a password perspective or applications, but also the data, right? The data that's out there and who has access to it. We're seeing a lot of challenges around applications lately, to be honest with you, TJ. I don't know if you guys have experienced a lot of that, but from an application perspective, there's a lot of sprawl out there, right? I was talking to a client a week ago, and he was calling out 300 applications in the organization, right? And the organization's about 500 to 600 people. A lot of applications. We're talking, rationalization of those apps, right? But again, you talk security around that and who has access to those applications. That's at the forefront of our conversations. I don't know have you guys come across
all the time. I mean, it's a very common thing, and it continues to grow every year. There's a new application, there's a new service. As we make this move to the cloud, the sprawl of applications and management of those applications becomes even more difficult. We used to just have to worry about Active Directory, our main directory service, and our on-prem applications and being able to manage those in a single location. But I think that as more services have come online, and to your point, it's not uncommon to hear hundreds of applications for companies with only a few hundred employees at those companies. A lot of that comes down to every single department within that organization is going to have their own suite of applications, their own specialty, solutions that they're using. And so, having to manage all of that becomes even more of a challenge at smaller organizations, but large organizations, it just is compounded and becomes even bigger. So definitely relatable.
Yeah, and a lot of it's flexibility, right? We're seeing a lot of adoption in cloud technologies, right? They're that's just the progression of where we're going, and it allows the organizations to be flexible, right? Productive, but it also makes it pretty difficult for IT teams to keep track of who has access to what applications and to which devices, right? It's not just apps; it's hardware. I mentioned
Or
data.
physical locations, right? How do you get into the front door of your main office? Are you supposed to be in the research office, or are you supposed to be in the front office, managing those types of things, managing access to email, managing access to file shares, data, customer data? All of these things need a level of management on them. Yep.
Yeah, it's risk. It's assessing risk against those. It's assessing life cycle of identity around those. and really the auditing of that, right? You guys do a great job with your solution, right? Maybe you can get to that a little bit, right? Because I've had conversations with CTOs out there, and we talk about governance of this data and the life cycle of identity. And when I talk about the tool set that you guys have, the ears perk up. It really does, and it's a holistic conversation. It's not so much about, hey, this is a Clear Skye product. It's really around that full life cycle and having automation around it, and that there is a solution out there for it, right? So we start getting into those conversations, and they get into the life cycle of onboarding, offboarding, and it gets into data. It gets into infrastructure. So how do you guys today leverage the conversations around governance, not only on applications, but with those devices, right? And having access to those, and who has access, in the life cycle around that?
That's a good question. So I would say from a Clear Skye perspective, our app is built 100% native to ServiceNow. I'm sure that many of the processes that are adjacent to Access are being done within ServiceNow. For example, onboarding, right, is probably something that you have conversations with quite a bit. What type of access and accounts are created? And then on day 2, when they start at the organization, how are they enabled to be able to perform their jobs effectively? And how do we do that quickly, but also ensure that governance is being covered? So, Clear Skye as an application will actually aggregate all of that access data, connect to your directories, your cloud systems, and pull it all into the ServiceNow platform and aggregate and determine who has access to what within the system. Once we have that all under the platform, and often people will say it is the sort of CMDB of access, because we have configuration, relationships, roles, all those things. And then that allows us to enable policies for those other business processes. So once we have the data, once we understand the access that exists, we can dictate policies that say, okay, let's go ahead and grant these individuals in HR, finance, or marketing their access automatically, and set up their accounts automatically. But we don't just stop there. It's more of a life cycle, right? So once we provision that initial access, being able to track and audit it throughout the life of their employment. And then on the tail side of a life cycle event is when someone departs the organization, also making sure that access is easily tracked and revoked. So we're not just continuously granting access to folks, but we're ensuring that compliance is being followed and that access is revoked in a timely manner when they leave the organization also. And that's really around identity, not only employee identities. You hear about vendor identities, contractor identities, and different types of identities that may have access that don't come in through the HR system or standard processes, but also having to manage those identities and their access in the organization also. So all of that's happening on the ServiceNow platform with Clear Skye, being able to pull that data in, being able to configure your policies, and then being able to integrate it with those other business processes that you may be working on. I'm sure you're talking to leaders of companies who are looking to improve the experience employees have when they join the organization, and access is a major part of that, and making sure that you're not just granting it, but there's a life cycle and there's process involved in the full life cycle of the access.
Yeah, no, yeah, and those conversations around workflows, I mean, they're pretty broad, right? As we're implementing ServiceNow, right? It's a platform that is very, very robust, and governance around each one of those applications within the platform is paramount, right? Like ServiceNow does a great job with understanding and segregating data, right? However, the life cycle and the processes around how an organization should be managing with in mind of the outcomes that they have is important. When we start having conversations around onboarding, offboarding, for example, like I mentioned earlier, that security aspect is always at the forefront, right? I always like to tell corporations or my clients that I'm having conversations, or even prospects, that the access to accounts, system accounts within your organization is really it's a doorway, right, of their data. So you have to be very careful in who has access to what, and even the level of access of each one of those either applications or databases that they need, right? A lot of times we see groups being configured, and they just kind of throw folks in there and say, okay, everybody in this group has this type of access. it's a very blanketed approach, right? And then when you start getting very granular with that, it can be complex, right? But again, process first, and you start understanding what that should look like and advise. Then you need the automation workflow in the back end, right? I mean, there's ways of doing it within ServiceNow today, but I know your solution is pretty robust, obviously, right? We work together a lot in getting those out there, but again, the security aspect and the life cycle is key across the board, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of those conversations. The ones that the conversation starters where they reach out to us and they start talking about IGA, the ones that I kind of cringe a little bit on are the ones that are after the fact, right? Like we're looking at audits that didn't pass, or even worse, there's a breach somewhere, right? So now we're kind of scrambling and making sure that we can put some processes in place and some solutions quickly. But again, being proactive with this is key, right? It's not only securing your data and securing who has access to what, but it keeps you out of the news. And I think people sometimes underestimate the fact that some of these breaches or some of these issues can get pretty ugly, right? Not only with the data being exposed, but just reputation, right? Even if it's something small. So those conversations are the ones that we're having a lot these days, to be honest with you.
No, and I mean that's a very common use case where there's a fire that needs to be put out first before we can even start to look at improving processes over time. Now we've used the word or the acronym a few times, IGA, and I know that coming from a ServiceNow background, I didn't know what IGA was. When you're talking to customers, I'm sure they're not like, I need IGA, but it probably comes off with, I need to be able to audit my access better, right? Or I need to allow my end users to be able to easily get access while ensuring approvals are happening, and that we're finding efficiencies in the actual activity of provisioning that, right? You hear things like that more often than IGA. And I would almost say that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, even when I was a ServiceNow developer working on the services side and working on projects, we would hear components of IGA all the time, right? But it was often just a step in the broader activity of some other business process. Like we said, onboarding, offboarding, talked about lifecycle a little bit, but you would hear something like, oh, well, we need to initiate this new employee onboarding workflow, whether you're using ServiceNow's HR onboarding or whether you're building your own, that there would be some kind of intake event that would start the process, and you would need to give someone a laptop, and you would need to make sure their office was set up and that they were going to go to their day one training and all of those things. And oftentimes access was seen as just another step in those activities, right? So you see, oh, we need to provision an account and we need to grant this type of access, right? And that was often getting built into the workflows themselves. So we do see a lot of that. And to your point, I mean, I think we see a lot of the governance or the cleanup after the fact of implementing those things without the life cycle in mind. So, we did an audit, and there was findings in our audit that these accounts were either created and never disabled, or they haven't been reviewed in a long time. So nobody knows why they were created or what they're for. And those are activities that our application will cover also. So being able to pull that data in, review that data, and then make the right decisions about whether that access is still needed. And customers are doing this today. I'm sure you hear spreadsheets, right? Yeah. ServiceNow is known for replacing spreadsheets and business processes and email, right? Spreadsheets and email is our number one competitor in the space.
I thought it's still that. But it is.
And it's the same for identity, right? And access is organizations today are talking to subject matter experts. They're exporting that data, they're sending it around, they're hopefully getting valid responses from teammates, or maybe they're getting get this off my plate, okay, everything looks fine. And then once those decisions come back, people are often creating tickets in ServiceNow to remediate those activities, right? And so what our app will do is just connect to those systems, pull in the data automatically, aggregate it. ServiceNow has a fantastic, notification system, workflows, SLAs, reminders, escalations can all happen. And then the documentation that all of this is happening. We've seen customers who feed this into the GRC or IRM application and can automatically reflect on where they're compliant and non-compliant in some of those, compliance frameworks like HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley for publicly traded companies, right? And it all sort of is interconnected.
We Yeah, that's exactly where it goes, right? Typically, we start conversations around, like I said, usually it's onboarding, offboarding. You start having these conversations, right? We bring it up all the time, right? However, our one of our heavy focuses is in IRM, right? Integrated risk management, right? So, and that's kind of almost, I'm not going to say it's from my perspective in parallel. It's almost like after the fact in a sense, right? Because now you're governing, but again, what are you doing? What process do you have in place today to actually do that work? And then you're going to put that governance around it. A lot of folks are kind of going backwards, right? So we have to have that conversation. That let's look at your process up front and let's see how you guys are actually running with this, right? Again, spreadsheets all day long. We see that everywhere. I mean, it's a very common attribute. That's why we're here a lot of the times, right? Because we're talking digital transformation. And that's what it really boils down to. So grabbing those spreadsheets and how they're doing it, locking that down, putting some governance around it, but then again having that IRM at the top, ensuring that everyone's in compliance, policies are in place and such, right? So I know you guys kind of tap into that a bit, but focus really is on IGA, right?
It really is. Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who are listening in, I mean, you may have a project today, whether it's a compliance finding that is related to identity and access, or you may be looking to initiate a end user experience project about making a better experience for onboarding employees. Or, you may be dealing with risk about, cleaning up your offboarding activities and ensuring those are happening in a timely fashion. And I think this is a webinar really just of awareness, right? That there's these symptoms in an organization that are related to identity. And as we start down the path of defining and implementing these, that we're doing it with a strong foundation and that it's accounting for these things because, even though your focus is onboarding today, tomorrow it may be offboarding, and the following day it may be transfers or changes to identities, or it may be related to an audit finding or mitigating risk across the organization also. And many of these processes live in ServiceNow today. So, just better understanding that it's more than just onboarding, but all these other things that are relevant. And if, you had questions or, want to ask those in chat, we're more than happy to answer or any questions you might have.
Yeah. I mean, that change, you also called out the change piece, right? Within the change management conversations, I mean, that's it's at the front as well, right? Of how are you managing access and have someone with the authority to make a change to any type of environment, right? So think of your cabs, for example, right? When you're asking permission to make changes somewhere, right? Everybody needs to look at all of the moving parts, whose systems are being tied to what other systems, and what is that impact against that. I mean, with IGA to some degree, you can actually use those processes to manage those changes within change management, right? I mean, locking a change down and then giving certain people access to make that change within that window is crucial, right? So I know you guys have a flavor of that, right? You guys actually touched on some of that.
It's a really good point you bring up, and excited to talk about it. Is that so? I've always seen change management, the process in general, as sort of I call it a paper process. Even if it's a digital process today, it's still a process that doesn't have technical enforcement. Like, for example, if you're an engineer today and you're listening to this call, there may be a chance that you have access, you probably have elevated privileges within your organization to do the things you need to do. And then your manager comes in and says, every single change you make requires a change request that goes through CAB approval to, mitigate any risk. Well, not submitting a change doesn't prevent you from making the change. You may get fired after the fact if something blows up, but it's still not enforcing that process. And so by having your change management process within ServiceNow and your identity data within ServiceNow, it enables these types of capabilities to say, well, you don't actually have access to do this thing until you've been approved, right? So you can submit your change request, you can have your CMDB, your CIs, your servers associated with it that say, okay, I'm going to reboot this server on this day. Well, with Clear Skye and ServiceNow's change management working together, we could say, okay, well, what access does it take to reboot a server? And then we can determine that, okay, well, Arnold's asking to reboot this server. We're going to grant him access to reboot that server on the day in the change window when it starts that's when he's going to have access to do that thing. And then as soon as the change window closes or the change has been completed, we're going to go ahead and revoke that access. So at no point, during the sort of daily operations of Arnold, can he do those things without the proper approval, the proper governance surrounding it? And it also means that if Arnold ever clicked on a link that said, free ServiceNow training, which actually was a phishing attack or something, that, the credentials and the access he have couldn't be used to then compromise additional systems within the organization. So it's exciting to be able to move beyond business processes that are decoupled from their technical controls. And it's just one story out of, a dozen that working with, your IGA data, your identity data on ServiceNow, your access data, alongside your change management processes or your software asset management processes or your GRC, IRM processes, just tell this much better together story, and really allow you to get to the heart of why you implemented those processes to begin with, like change management.
Yeah. And for the record, Arnold does not click on links that are not. I can't speak for my mom, which I had a conversation with the other day. She actually did something like that, which is very interesting. And I'm just like, Mom, and it's like it's a different world for her. So
I mean, that's the challenge, is that, like, for most parts, like, we trust our engineers, we trust our developers,
exactly.
But you're one link away from having your credentials compromised, your system compromised, and then identity is all about how much damage can someone do once they've compromised your credentials, right? By clicking on a link, clicking on a funny post, something like that. And then if you have all the keys to the kingdom and you're over provisioned and you have all this access, well, they're going to then have all this access to this enterprise systems. And, we often think of hackers as these folks who, like, once they get their credentials, the attack starts and they start thinking about it and bouncing around in the environment. At this point, that hacker has all these scripts already queued up. So the second your credentials are compromised, they're executing playbooks to start attacking the systems within, and how far can they go into your organization on a daily basis. Whereas if we just open up that window during the change window and close it right away, they have a much, a smaller attack vector to hit once they do compromise your credentials. And it's only a matter of time. I'm not saying everybody's going to get compromised, but history proves that, people get compromised in every single organization across the world. How big is the impact of that compromise is going to be determined based on how many credentials you have, how much access you have once that compromise happens.
And that's key. That's actually a great point, right? Because the percentage of credentials that are being hacked, whether it's through social engineering or brute force, is very high, right? It's high. I don't know, it's probably about 60% or something like that. However, mitigating that, again, looking at I'll go back to the use case or the comment I made earlier when I was talking to one of my clients. He's talking about over 100 and something apps, right? I mean, we're doing an app rationalization with them, an exercise, so we're looking at all redundancies and such, right? And we're finding a lot of that. So again, we're paring that down. That alone in itself is minimizing that risk, right? Of folks having access to things that they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And again, you have a lot of remote workforce today, right? They're out there, they're doing things. They're not all going in through a VPN. A lot of them are at coffee shops, those kind of things. They can't, the risk is a bit higher there, right? Whether it's somebody looking over their shoulder, all kinds of very simple ways of doing that. Once they're in, again, you need to be able to mitigate that pretty quickly and have some playbooks to run fast, right?
So, I mean, it's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. And I say exciting, but, scary stuff in some cases, right? With the fear of getting compromised. But also it's exciting to see these two worlds join together. The ServiceNow world, which is heavily business process, user experience, and driving that digital transformation. And the identity world, and how identity can enable a lot of those processes to make you more secure, make you more efficient. And then on the flip side, how those business processes can enable the decisions and understanding of risk in your identity world, and bringing those two things together. So, I mean, it's amazing to work with you, Arnold, over at MavenNext, and the work you guys are doing, and you guys being able to provide that business context and that understanding of where your clients are going, and us, with the identity side of the world. being able to help and provide solutions for you. Also, it's a great partnership we have.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I mean, what excites me is that value that we bring to the clients, right? Whether it's just that advisory and having these conversations that we're doing right now, but also bringing those solutions in place, right? And having those success afterwards, right? When you see the actual impact that you're having in minimizing a lot of this risk, people lose sleep over this stuff every single day, right? And a lot of it is very, you can solve these challenges with best practices that are already out there. It's just a matter of having the conversations and understanding exactly how things are being done in that organization, so we can kind of lock it down for them. Process is huge, just to mitigate a lot of that stuff, right? The tool comes after, but once you have all those processes in place, again, the app rationalization exercise that we're doing is a good example of that. That minimizes risk in itself just by identifying those and eliminating a lot of redundancy there. But then you bring in the tool set, like ClearSkye tool set, and it just kind of takes it to that next level. So, I mean, for those that are listening, if there's anything that kind of got your attention or resonates with you, feel free to reach out to us. Just more than happy to have conversations, talk. My hope is that TJ, we can do a little bit more of these. They're a bit informal, more just having conversations, but the goal here is really to provide value for folks, right? Whether it's hey, you know what, you identified something that I'm having, or hey, I'm gonna give you a call. I'm gonna reach out, say hello, and talk about something that I'm going through. More than happy to jump on calls and do that.
No, that's fantastic. That's why we're here.
Yep.
Thanks again, Arnold, for taking the time today, and look forward to working with you more.
Yeah, man.